All right, good evening. And several years ago, you start wondering where your old friends are and what happened to them. I got the idea to Google one of my old buddies, one of my best friends from high school, just to see where he is now. And turns out he's a ordained Southern Baptist minister teaching young earth creationism in a fundamentalist Christian school in Fort Worth, Texas. And his school has a motto that says, "The Bible is the only source of truth in our world." As if the Bible were a source of truth. As if, well, more importantly, this assertion assumes that there is no truth in the whole of reality apart from that little book of mythology. That if the Bible is wrong, then reality is wrong. And in all the arguments that I've recently had with apologists, it always turns into that rather quickly. In order for them to argue that their God is real, somehow reality need not be. Or if they think that they can get us to doubt whether existence exists, then the existence of the supernatural will somehow seem reasonable by comparison. Let's see here. And this is what it really comes down to, isn't it? Whether you're going to accept reality as it really is, or whether you're going to make up something else and believe an illusion. Now, back in high school, my friend and I, or I thought that my friend and I both believed in God and evolution at the same time. And that we both discarded something shortly after high school. And I was interested in how we ended up on these extremes of this philosophical division. I was incurably curious about that. So I paid him a visit, and we talked for quite a while, but I just couldn't reach him. Trying to reason with the religious is a bit like going through the looking glass following Alice. I couldn't pin him to any definitions, couldn't get him to concede to any error of interpretation, and he artfully evaded every logical conclusion. I'm sure that everybody who's ever argued against faith-based beliefs has experienced this dance of duck and dodge, where the words change meaning at a whim, where the goalposts move constantly, and where any understanding can be undermined by distracting interruptions of disconnected irrelevancies, logical absurdities, and non sequiturs. Whenever the topic turned to science, and he actually does look a bit like this, which is kind of funny, his pleasantly smiling face took on the glazed stare of a mannequin, as if he was chanting silent mantras in his head to keep the logic out. And everything I tried to explain to my friend was well within his range of comprehension and level of education, but I just couldn't get through the armor of God that he had built around his mind. And that's what armor of God means, actually. It means to fortify the mind and to steel it against any logical argument so that you can't be reasoned out of your beliefs. My friend obviously couldn't convince me of anything either, because his rhetoric was limited to the Sunday school level and still wouldn't have worked on me even at that age. But he did make it very clear that he would continue to believe whatever he wants to believe simply because he wants to believe it. Even when it can't possibly be true, and when it clearly contradicts things we can prove really are true, but that his belief system would not allow him to acknowledge. Other theists have described their faith in similar ways. One of my other dear old friends actually told me, "I'm Christian because I like to believe in that, not because I think it's really true." And he doesn't see a conundrum with that. So, I mean, obviously they don't believe what they do the same way that I believe what I do. I think we're using different definitions for the word belief. I define it as a notion of subjective uncertainty, that which seems true to me but might not prove to be. It might be that for those who have never examined religion too, but it means something else to those who are deeply invested in it, and I'm talking about the extremists here, creationists, apologists. For them, Belief is an act of will, of mind over matter, wishful thinking, literally making dreams come true through the power of positive thought. Where there is a will, there is a way, and there is a way to will it into being. We're not talking about telekinesis here, we're talking about some altered states of perception. And it is as if they are in an episode of The Twilight Zone, where anything is possible if you believe that it is, but you need to believe with all your heart. And there's two good examples of this from Hollywood. One is an episode of Amazing Stories called The Mission. An aspiring cartoonist is positioned in the bubble turret on the belly of a bomber, and an enemy aircraft has sufficiently damaged it so that the turret is jammed and the gunner can't get out. The landing gear is also jammed, it can't come down. So that when the plane is forced to land without its wheels, and he's stuck in the bubble down there, he will be crushed and scraped along the runway. So, in a panic, he uses his imagination, gets out his pencils and draws wheels onto the airplane. He concentrates on the drawing so hard that it looks like he's going to have an aneurysm. And he convinces himself that the plane has wheels, so that when it lands, it does have wheels. And they're the cartoon wheels of his imagination. When his crewmen break the guy out of the turret, his mind is locked in a trance, and they get him away from the plane and slap him in the face to snap him out of it, and the wheels disappear because he literally dreamt them up. And the plane comes crashing onto the tarmac. This is how dreams come true if you believe hard enough. And I've actually seen this episode used to promote faith in places like apologetics blogs. The next example comes from a Christopher Reeve movie called Somewhere in Time. In this one, Reeve's character falls in love with a portrait of a woman from the past. So he gets a room in an old hotel that was built at that time, dressed in the fashion of the day, and he hypnotizes himself with a recording that says, "Today is June 27th, 1912. Your mind accepts this absolutely. It is 1912. So that when he is adequately convinced and he awakens, he is back in time and he finds the object of his obsession. Only when you remove all doubt and make yourself believe absolutely will miracles like this happen. And this is how religious faith is often presented. Amusingly, the fun is over when he pulls a forgotten coin out of his pocket, and it's a penny from 1979. And once he sees the date on the penny in his hand, the illusion is broken and he is yanked back to his own original reality for the rest of his natural life. However, in his unnatural afterlife, he and his past life lover are reunited in heaven, reinforcing the religious message regarding the power of pretend. Religion is literally a matter of make-believe, a form of self-hypnosis to preserve a preferred delusion. One way to commit to your conviction is to be completely invested in it. Remember this guy? Robert Fitzpatrick was one of those people who had sold everything he had and spent all his money on billboards advertising Harold Camping's predicted end of the world back in May 2011. It was supposed to happen at exactly 6 p.m., and here he is at Times Square about a minute or so after that. Ironically, if the world doesn't end, then he'd be doomed because he's rendered himself penniless and homeless in his advancing years. He put himself in a position where he had to believe, and it still didn't work. Another much more amusing example came from the news a couple of weeks ago. Somebody recognized it. It seems there's this one particular tree outside this one particular hospital, and this very sick little old lady who happened to be Catholic went to this tree and she put her hands on the tree and she said, "By the glory of God." And she felt the tears of Jesus. And she spread the words, and all these other Catholics, and maybe other Christians too, I don't know, discovered this one little tree. And that if you go to this one tree, and you put your hands on this one tree, and you say the words, by the glory of God, you will feel the tears of Jesus. Now, the funny thing is that, I mean, look at all the anecdotal stories that you ever hear that promote the existence of God. And they're always unverifiable enigmas like this, things you can't look into. You have to give the benefit of the doubt, even though there isn't any benefit of the doubt. You say, you've got to be misunderstanding something, I don't believe that. Well, you're just a skeptic, you're just a cynic. And if you can't explain it, that proves they're God. However, in this one particular instance, as in any others that we can look up, once you can check out of the details, you find out that there is a little confirmation bias, a little manipulation, a little misunderstanding. It turns out it's not just this one particular tree, but lots of similar trees, not just there, but across the South, especially in the summer. And they will drop this rain on you, whether you say by the glory of God, or whether you say what time is it, or whether you don't say anything at all, because it's summertime. And these trees are infested with lice. And the lice drink the sap out of the tree and expel it through their abdomen like a fountain. These people are getting pissed on by a bunch of bugs. Now, what's especially funny about this is not that. It's not that they're being pissed on by a bunch of bugs. It's what happens when some inconvenient jerk comes up and relates the truth to them and shows them the bugs and shows them what there really is. Were they embarrassed? Were they outraged? No, they were undaunted, because they prefer to interpret that this is the work of God being manifest here on earth. We have a saying down south: don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining. And that's supposed to mean don't take me for a fool. So how big a fool are you when you know you're being pissed on and you're still praising the rain? The Lord works in delirious ways. Now, and it's not just stupid people. I have a dear old friend who surprisingly looks like this guy. And this is somebody who is a genius. He's a very successful businessman. He's a very loving and caring husband and father. He's somebody that I admire and respect very much. And you need to know that before I continue. This guy was once as smart and skeptical as anybody I ever knew. Then he was involved in a car wreck, which he survived, and he can't explain why he survived. And he just, now I'm sure that if he could replay the accident in slow motion, that he would understand what really happened, but you can't do that. So he decided that it must have been an act of God. And he had no reason to jump to that conclusion, but he did. And worse, he decided that it had to be the Christian God, and that worse than that, it had to be that the Bible isn't really wrong about all the things we know the Bible is wrong about. Well, it is a little worse than that. See, the wreck messed up his back. He's in agony every day, and he's already making excuses for a deity that does incomplete miracles. But, as I said, he's decided, because he lives in Texas, that it must be the Christian God, and that the Bible must be correct. And I'm sure that if he was born in the Punjab province of India, he might just as easily have thought that it was Guru Nanak, or that it was Krishna, or that it was Allah. But of course he lives in the land of televangelists. He's going to believe the God that he's conditioned to believe in. But it gets even worse. He added another pile of erroneous assumptions onto his already teetering heap. Because he didn't know the real explanation, he assumed it was magic. He further assumed it was a God. He assumed that it was the Christian God. And then he made the leap that the Bible was correct, and my friend became a creationist, despite all his genius. Now, the intellectual world would say that anything that is unexplained, or the religious world would say that anything that is unexplained by science is explained by God. But magic is not an explanation. It's an excuse for what you don't know. And if you look up the definitions of magic and miracle in a collection of dictionaries and compare them for consensus, you'll see that they have the same definition. They are the same thing. Effectively, just as a VIP is assassinated rather than murdered, a miracle is the sort of magic that a god does. Now, to be fair, that was many years ago, and my friend has made some progress since then. And let's see, I want to caution also that anytime we have a natural explanation, when we walked away for anything that used to be attributed to the supernatural, the natural explanation has always turned out to be a revelation of whole new fields of studies as yet or previously unimagined, and which are far more complex and fascinating than our previous notions of deities and witchcraft. Now, when my friend and I last spoke of this, he seems to have dropped the creationist nonsense and has worked his way back a bit closer to deism. I only bring it up now to show that it doesn't matter how smart you are. Faith circumvents the intellect, allowing smart people to believe some really stupid things. And on another, even more important note, is that once a creationist becomes engaged in the evolution debate, and they start learning what the real evidence and arguments actually are, they quickly find themselves facing a choice, whether to remain honest or whether to remain creationist. Because the deeper they delve, the more obvious it will be that they can't continue to be both. We've already seen that faith is unreasonable, irrational, illogical, illusional, and imaginary, but it's also deeply dishonest, and this is nowhere more obvious than in creationism. Of course, creation science isn't science at all, but a form of religious extremism, which is opposed to science both in principle and practice. Creationism isn't just the belief that a God created everything. There are plenty of people who believe that who are not creationists. It's more a matter of how he did it. Creationists worship a book every bit as much as a deity. The book is what has to be infallible. So they insist that it has to be miraculous means rather than natural ones. Of course, they object to evolution by definition, but that's not their primary goal. It's actually methodological naturalism that they're opposed to. They want to be able to propose magic as an explanation. Creation science is pretty much the exact opposite of real science, but to some people it sounds scientific because they have real scientists betraying their own education in religiously motivated propaganda. For example, here we have a couple of creation scientists. Both of these men have a bachelor's degree in geology and both are arguing over the same fossil. This is probably the ultimate transitional species ever, Acanthostega gannari, discovered by Per Ahlberg and Jennifer Clack of Cambridge University only about 1988, if I remember correctly. And it's part of a fairly fluid chain of transitions from lobe-finned fish to land-dwelling tetrapods. If you've ever seen the Darwin fish emblem, this is about as close to that as we've found so far. So that's why I said it's the ultimate transition. Now, Andrew Snelling says that it's just an amphibian and that it can't be transitional species because the legs are mounted in a load-bearing fashion designed for walking, not swimming. Paul Garner says it's essentially just a fish and it can't be transitional because its legs are designed for swimming, not walking, because he says they're not capable of supporting the weight out of water. These are both experts examining the same fossil and coming to opposite conclusions, as long as it's not a transition. However, I've noticed that whenever creationists can't consistently agree on whether something is a fish or a tetrapod, a dinosaur or a bird, or an ape or a man, that's when it's a transitional species. Both of these men work for Answers in Genesis, one of the top 10 worst anti-science websites there is. There are lots of creationist websites spreading misinformation on the internet, but this one is a multi-million-dollar industry selling lies to gullible believers. They also do public seminars and market books, videos, and tract comics designed to mislead parents into deceiving their children in homeschool. The president of this insidious organization is one Ken Ham. In addition to Answers in Genesis, he also runs the Creationist Museum in Kentucky and is trying to garner donations to build a Noah's Ark theme park with an actual-sized ark. The funny part about that is that with all the thousands of people helping him and millions of donated dollars and all this modern technology, he still can't build a box that big. And if he could, it wouldn't be seaworthy. And if it was, it still wouldn't hold all the animals necessary. And he's not even 600 years old. Now, Ken Ham has been ignoring me for years, but he decided to publicly ridicule my wife, who is a science teacher, because she understands science better than he does. He denied that humans are classified in the taxonomic superfamily Hominoidea, and that consequently we are a subset of apes. So we had to break out the data to prove him wrong. I'm sorry, he's just too easy for this joke. Now, of course, no amount of proof will change his mind. Ham said many times that whenever he has the proof that his favorite fables are wrong, he simply ignores the facts and believes the fantasy. He refers to it as God glasses. It's a confirmation bias, he just doesn't recognize it as that name. And a month or so ago, the Texas Homeschool Coalition invited Ken Ham to be their keynote speaker at their state conference. We consider that a travesty of irresponsible parenting. The people who invited this man to speak to their homeschoolers are not interested in their children's education because they're not going to learn anything from him that is actually true or useful. Creationism is composed entirely of deceivers and or deceived. They can be both, but there is no third category. Nothing they teach is verifiably true. It's all deliberately distorted and intentionally deceptive, so it is wholly inappropriate that Ken Ham and frauds of his ilk should be considered educators. Houston Atheists issued a formal challenge to Ken Ham, asking him to debate me in person in front of a live audience at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Ham refused, and we can only speculate as to why. So my wife and I joined with several other science advocates, and we picketed the event. The results, or the opposition that we received, was quite sad. This guy, for example, and bear in mind he writes textbooks for homeschool students. He admitted to me on this video that this picture was taken from that it did not matter that the lesson plans were factually inaccurate. All that mattered was whether we believed in God. In addition to that, there was another couple that came out that wanted to see how we tick. We're out there in 107-degree heat, and these people wanted to just see why we're out there, why we felt so motivated, why did we care about what other people taught their children. And they told me that we have to be, as atheists, we have to be tolerant of children who start out like most of us do, believing in a little bit of science, a little bit of religion, maybe, if that's the culture that we're born into, that only makes them a nominal Christian. Now, we explained how evolution is factual. They said that they had studied it in school, and yet they didn't know what it was. What a big surprise. Couldn't define it, couldn't give an example of it, couldn't show any of the lessons that you would expect to have learned before you could make a claim like that. But we went through, list by list, how we know that evolution is absolutely undeniable, unquestionable, demonstrated fact. And they told us that in their Calvinist perspective, that when you accept the Bible, you have to accept the whole Bible, even the parts you know are wrong. Many times Christians have confessed to me that it doesn't matter what the facts are, they're going to believe what they want to believe. But the truth is what the facts are. It's so irritating to me whenever I challenge someone's religious beliefs and they say, why can't I believe what I want to believe? This is an admission that they don't care what the truth really is, and that they already know that that truth isn't what they want it to be. Why would somebody want to believe something that probably isn't true? Religious people have told me that they have a right to be wrong, meaning that they can believe whatever they want regardless what the truth is, and I suppose they do have that right. But do they have the right to teach that to their kids and have them perpetuate it? Do you have a right to teach your children that Columbus discovered Ohio in 1942? Or that Elvis Presley was an actual monarch ruling over these United States in the Middle Ages? I had to use these examples for these Calvinists to understand the necessity of factual accuracy in a school lesson. You can tell your kids that you believe that the moon landing was a hoax, or that you believe that 9/11 was an inside job ordered by alien reptiles of the Illuminati. But you can't teach that as an established fact. You need to distinguish knowledge from beliefs. It is dishonest to assert as fact that which is not evidently true, and yet that's what all religions do. That's why Christians pretend to witness things they've never actually seen. They go on faith, not on sight, believing only what is not seen. If you look up the definition of faith, you'll see that the dictionary lists two different contexts. If the one for the common vernacular applies, wherein faith is a secure confidence in the validity and veracity of a given concept, then I have faith and the creationists don't, because I know that my position will be vindicated by an exploration of the facts, by analysis of the data. I know that mine is going to come out on top. And more than that, if mine does not come out on top, I still win, because I'll be corrected, and I would rather be corrected than be forever wrong and never know it. They have a belief system, which means that they have required beliefs and they have prohibited beliefs, and they must be defended and adhered to, so they dare not risk what my beliefs have to endure regularly. On some level, they already know that I'm right, and that their beliefs cannot withstand the scrutiny of science or critical thinking on any level, really, but that's not important to them. Despite all their claims of absolute truth with a capital T, the fact is that from their perspective, whatever the truth is, doesn't really matter. Because according to all other definitive sources apart from the dictionary, faith is only described in the context of religion, and there it is an unsupported assertion of stoic conviction which is assumed without reason and defended against all reason, and sometimes the faithful will even admit that, at least implicitly, if not explicitly also. Every creationist organization there is posts a statement of faith wherein they admit to having assumed a collection of crazy conclusions at the onset, which they promise to believe no matter how absurd they turn out to be, and they vow never to admit when they're wrong. I'm not kidding. Every statement of faith paraphrases this kind of blatantly dishonest, idiotic insanity, and this is why I always say that faith is the most dishonest position it is possible to have. I challenge anyone to show me how it could be any worse. Religious people have every motivation to lie, not just because they believe something that isn't true, but because their faith requires that they defend a belief even when they know it's not true, and I can cite a number of references where believers have admitted that as a matter of public record. The more faith they have, the less reasons matter, the less they're able to reason or be reasoned with. And the only thing I find impressive about creationism is how anyone can be so consistently proven to be absolutely wrong about absolutely everything 100% of the time for such a long time and still believe theirs is the absolute truth. A statement isn't truth just because you assert it or believe it is true. We can't call it truth until you can show that it is true. When a witness takes a stand and swears to tell the truth, do we all assume that that's what he's always going to do? We know that sometimes people lie under oath. It's called perjury. It's a thing. It happens. And that's why the court very often has the job of trying to show whether it is the truth. And if we define truth as whatever we can show to be true, then there is no truth in religion. It strikes me that there are those who have a deep-seated need to believe, and they will lie in their defense of their alleged faith. And for others, natural curiosity is dominant. leading to an honest desire to understand whatever is really true, even if they couldn't predict what that will be. I see the whole faith versus reason debate as a conflict between these two extremes. So what would you do if the real truth mattered more than whatever you wanted to believe? You would question your own assumptions. You would doubt your own convictions. You would challenge your own biases. You would seek and expose flaws in your position. You would reject or correct those flaws. You would be suspicious of authority. You'd be suspicious of testimony. You'd be suspicious of subjectivity. You would believe only what was positively evident. You would believe only tentatively even then. And you wouldn't believe anything on faith. It doesn't matter what you believe or what you believe in. All that matters is how accurate you can show your claims to be. If you can't show that you're right, you're not. That's the rule. And obviously I'm not speaking at this time to this collection of people. I'm speaking to those who might be watching on video. If you can't demonstrate that to any degree at all, by any means whatsoever, then we've nothing to talk about. There is only what is supported and what is not supported by evidence, and what is not supported does not warrant serious consideration. Come back when you have substance. Until then, having no reason to believe is a pretty good reason not to believe. And if you're talking about things with neither precedent nor parallel, things that can't be measured or analyzed, verified or falsified, and thus require faith, that one fact alone is sufficient indictment that it is not real. So people say, well, if there is no God, what is the meaning of life? And I say, well, what is the meaning of God? Because whether God exists or not is irrelevant. I missed this slide. I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. I'm sorry, I missed this slide. I got into this. Whether God exists or not is irrelevant. Because whether anyone's God exists or not, either way, we are arrogant, vain, but still evolving apes, and all our sacred scriptures are man-made mythology. Either way, every religion has gotten an awful lot wrong, and no religion can show even one thing any of them surely got right. Either way, humans express both humanism and inhumanity, and in either case they credit their favorite deities, asking that we pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Either way, prayers are useless compared to helping hands. Either way, our laws are conceived and enforced by people, and regardless whether God exists, history will be our judge. Now I'm done. Thank you. Can somebody come up here and unwire me?
I believe that's everything we had formally on the schedule for tonight. Is that accurate? So the rest of the evening belongs to all of you. So thank you for being here this evening. What time do we start in the morning?
There will be coffee in the room at 8:30, and we'll have whatever we can get in terms of schedules, programs, information, such. You're doing that.
All right, so coffee at 8:30. Wonderful. If you couldn't hear, it's coffee at 8:30. The formal program starts at 9. We hope you have a wonderful night of rest, and we'll see you in the morning. Thank you.